Hi there, I'm Colin, and I'm the Creative Arts and Communications Coordinator at Redemption Church. We are a radically inclusive community of hope seeking to live Jesus-centered lives, and we currently are in the season of Lent. During Lent, we are invited to consider the fragility of life, the finitude of our existence, the things we have done and left undone, and the reality that through it all, we are beloved by our Creator. The following sermon is part of a Lenten series spent journeying with Jesus to the cross, where we consider how Jesus shows us what it means to live fully human lives amid chaos and death. Now, wherever you find yourself today, we're glad you're here, and we hope this sermon is an encouragement to you. We rely on the generosity of our community, and this includes you, to share these sermons and pursue financial health as a community. To participate in giving, visit redemptionhru.com/give. Now, here's this week's sermon.
So, good morning. There was some commentary on the longer reading, and I understand. But it feels like if ever we are going to together listen to large chunks of Scripture, this next 7 days is the time to do it. And I understand it's hard and it's difficult and it's challenging, and especially with Luke's gospel passage here, because Luke seems to jump around and we're in one scene and then all of a sudden we're in the next and all of a sudden we're in the next. And it can be a little disorienting and discombobulating, but I'm prayerful and hopeful that God will work through the things that we've heard. And as I reflected on this passage this week and what in the heck are we going to do with it and how we're going to preach it, I came across this painting. Many of you may have seen it. It's called The Procession to Calgary. It's painted by Peter Bruegel in the 16th century, and it depicts the journey of Christ, and it's meant to be read from left to right. And he's surrounded by the goings-on of a chaotic flourish of life of the 16th century. Now, if you grew up in the 90s like I did, you might be like, this isn't a 16th century painting. This is a Where's Waldo painting. Because you're going, where in the world is Jesus in this painting? And there's there's hundreds of characters, and they're doing their own thing. They each have like a little story, and you can go Google this later and zoom in on all the different pieces and parts and see what all Bruegel is doing with this painting. It's pretty fascinating. But on the left is Jerusalem, and it's showered in light with a landscape dotted with healthy living trees. It's green, it's bright, it's flourishing. And on the right is the place of Jesus' crucifixion, the place of the skull. Crowds have rushed ahead to spectate the spectacle of someone being put to death, which would have been common in the 16th century. And in this area, it's sparse. The only devices that you see, the only so-called trees, as it were, are torture devices, skulls, and some corpses left behind on the torture devices. But most importantly, at the center of the painting, you can maybe just make it out from where you're sitting, is Christ. You probably may not be able to see him, but you can see his cross. He lays fallen underneath it. He's wearing a blue gown and a crown of thorns, and missing are the usual artistic garnishments of Jesus. There's no halo, there's no sort of spiritual eminence, there's no sort of essence around him. It's just the man. Nothing suggested that he's anything other than just another felon on his way to capital punishment. I heard of this painting in an article, in a Plow journal article, right? This is a thing you'll all read, right? Plow magazine. It's written by Sister Carino Hoder, a nun in the Dominican Sisters of St. Joseph, which, side note, I found that this order exists to contribute to the mission of the Order of Preachers by preaching and teaching the Catholic faith. I thought it was beautiful and I understand some of the restrictions that the Catholic faith has put on gender and women, that they now have an order of nuns whose sole purpose is to contribute to the preaching and proclamation of the good news through writing and preaching. I thought that was great. Side note over. But in her writing, Sister Hoder notes that this painting sits at the center of one of her fellow nuns' pin boards tacked in her room among various other prayer cards and holy pictures. And she first walked in and she noticed it and she said, "Oh, that's a striking painting." And her sister replied to her in what I imagine was a very serious and ominous tone, but probably not. "It's a picture of my soul." when I read that, I just immediately stopped and got chills because I'm like, oh my God, yes. This encapsulates so much, I think, of what our life, what our inner life with God looks like. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. And Christ is there, like somewhere, maybe in it, I don't know. The tiny Christ, the chaos all around, and a few people in the painting are actually even looking at Jesus, but most aren't. Most are unconcerned with him, unbothered by him. Most want to see the spectacle or are chasing around their thing or dealing with their problems. And what Bruegel captures from the 16th century life is what is very much still true in the 21st century. It's what is likely true in your heart, because it's what's true in my heart. That all of life, the busyness, the chaos, the bustling around with all the things to do and to buy and to tick off of our lists and the chaos, it all crowds out, it drowns out, it chokes out the Christ, the Word of God. What God has done and is doing. But this morning, what I want to remind us is that God has done it. And that God is doing it, whether you pay any attention to it or not, whether you see it or not, whether you're oriented towards it or not. And so good news. For those of you that are tired of the dour darkness, today is the last Sunday of Lent. Congratulations, you've made it. So if you grew up in the world that I did, this was Palm Sunday, and we would get the palms and we would wave, having no idea that the actual story is about this hypocrisy of oh, our king, let's kill him, in the next chapter. But as a kid, I'm yeah, we're going to wave our palm branches and greet Jesus. But it's also known as Passion Sunday. And this is where the church begins to tell the story of Jesus' final days. It's the last Sunday in Lent and the first Sunday of Holy Week. And through this season of Lent, we've been journeying with Jesus towards the cross. And now we're going to enter into the final moments of his life together. Our gospel reading today contains several scenes, and they seem a bit chaotic and unconnected or unrelated in some sense. They tell the chronological story of what happens next. But I think what Luke is doing is he's stitching them together to try and get something through to us other than just the details of oh yeah, and here's this data point. These scenes read as if there's this rushing towards something that feels inevitable. That there's this force at work, this gravitational pull that is drawing us in, and everyone in the scene seems to be resisting it, and yet in their resistance is contributing to it. I can't help but see Luke's contrast of the responses and the reaction of all the people surrounding Jesus and Jesus himself. And I think there's something here that we are meant to pay attention to. Something here that will nourish our souls if we will pay attention to it. And I think it boils down to this. To put in Brandon terms, I think we know what it is that God should be doing in our lives and in our world. I think we have a certain list of expectations, a certain set of surely God is going to do this, right? We have certain desires, certain expectations, certain assumptions about who God is, what God's like, what God's plan is. And for most of us, this is true until some sort of profound crisis hits us. And then our expectations meet reality. As Jesus enters what he calls your hour into the power of darkness, or in some translations, the hour of darkness, I can't help but think that both in our collective and personal hours of crisis or hours of suffering or hours of darkness, it seems to us as if God has failed, as if God hasn't shown up the way that we wanted God to or at all. And so we assume maybe God isn't there. Maybe God doesn't care. And I think so much of what's captured in Bruegel's painting is exactly this: the chaos of life and the noise that drowns out the beauty and the power of the work of God. Because in the midst of all this white noise, all this meaningless activity, all of this senseless suffering, all this confusion, all this chaos, Jesus seems to sit at the center. Regardless of whether we want him to be there or not, regardless of whether we acknowledge that he's there or not, he's there at the center, and he shows us what it means to be human, while at the same time acting in a way that rehumanizes us. And so I want to point out two things this morning that Jesus does for us in this story in Luke. The first is that Jesus shows us that living fully human lives will mean entrusting our lives to God. That of all the stuff, right? I can think back to when I was a younger person in church. I remember hearing things about like, well, here's the 5 steps to being a great leader, and here's the 6 ways to make you to have a strong God-centered family, and here's 5 ways to pray, and 10 ways to read your Bible, and there was all this stuff that kind of surrounded what it meant to be a Jesus follower, what it meant to be a Christian, what it meant to be like fully human. But I think what Jesus shows us is like, when you strip all that back, what it means is to cast your life, your body, your future, your well-being into the hands of God. And that is scary. Because I don't know about you, but I can't see God. I don't know about you, but I've never audibly heard God. I've never touched the face of God. I've read the words of God. I've heard the stories of God. I've felt God's presence in some sort of mystical sense, but that's not like a normal thing. I'm not walking around with that. I wish I were, but I'm not. And yet here's Jesus, right? This new Adam, this new human, who shows us that what it looks like to be a human being in God's world that is flourishing is to fully and absurdly entrust yourself to this invisible God. To quote that great prophet Drake, it's God's plan. Thank you. The pity laughs are appreciated, I think. I appreciate that. To really throw yourself on the fact that you believe that God has told you that he loves you and that he's got you and that he won't let you down. Like to cast yourself onto that reality. Right? This is something that our kids would totally get. They'd be like, yeah, absolutely, that's it. And yet as you've grown in adulthood and you face the sorts of gnarly things that life throws your way, you realize like, no, it's not quite that simple. You don't understand. In this economy? Because all of this flies in the face of the powers that we're confronted with every single day. The chief of which is death, which is the one we ignore, but is the one that confronts us all. The opportunities that we all have on an ongoing daily basis to take control of our lives and our stories and try to direct them in the way that we think they ought to go. Jesus explicitly refuses to do this. And so we see all of these characters around Jesus doing exactly this. So Judas, who cannot take Jesus' going absolutely nowhere ministry anymore. Like, I can't deal with this. 3 years ago, I hitched myself to this wagon and I thought we're going places. This is like the next king of Israel. And this man's talking about serving people at dinner. Like, I don't even know what to do with this anymore. And so he gets up from this meal and he's going to trade in his 3 years of ministry with Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, selling off the life of his so-called friend in hopes that he can maybe scrounge some sort of return out of the deal. But we also see it in the disciples who immediately, as Jesus begins to tell them the truth, rather than entrusting themselves to the God who loves them and to the Messiah who is in front of them, who is saying, hey, follow me, they immediately grow suspicious of one another. They put up walls. They begin to finagle and level blame and withdraw. They almost immediately show their hand when they begin to, right after Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me, well, which one of us is the greatest? Who's going to have status in your world, Jesus? Who has power in your world? Who are the famous people? Who's trending? Is it Peter? Is Peter trending right now, Jesus? What about proximity? Like, who gets to be the closest to you? Like, who do you really love? Who's important in your world, Jesus? And suddenly, Peter's misguided confession comes into focus because Peter thinks he's got this all dialed in, that he's seeing the world so clearly. And Jesus says, hey, Peter, you're about to betray me. And Peter's like, no, bro, I got you. I'll be in prison for you. I'll die for you. Later in this same story, he pulls out a sword, like, what? Jesus, I told you, here we go. And Jesus says, enough of this. You've got it wrong. And when my way becomes clear, you're going to tuck tail and you're going to run just like everybody else does. Because my way is not a way of power. It's not a way of swords. It's not a way of whatever you think the way is. And Jesus, in turn, shows us what we think life is all about, what we think salvation is, when he tells them, hey, when I sent you out, you didn't have any stuff. You didn't have any money. You had no protection. Were you taken care of? Yeah, absolutely. We were taken care of. Cool. The hour is now here for you to get your stuff, for you to sell your cloak and grab your sword. But Jesus, in the face of all of this, in the face of the betrayal, in the face of the power mongering, in the face of the positioning, in the face of the running, in the face of the reptilian brain's desire to seek self-preservation, Jesus washes the feet of his betrayer, knowing full well what he was about to do. Jesus refuses to take the way out that denies God and God's way, as much as he really wants to. Sweating as if blood was pouring out of his body. He's under so much anguish and stress and anxiety. Jesus doesn't grab a sword, but instead fully entrusts himself in prayer. And having been abandoned by just about everyone who's seated at this table in Luke's account, who's turned over by the religious leaders of his religion, right? Both as a human being who practiced it, but also as like the God of it. And Jesus, who was nailed to a cross by both Judah and Rome, the empires who were seeking to maintain their power for no real good reason at all, Jesus' response is not to be suspicious. It's not to put up walls. It's not hatred. It's not vengeance. It's not even justice, the way that we would measure and define justice. Instead, what does Jesus do? He dies with this on his lips: forgive them. And into your hands, Father, I commit my spirit, my life. Forgive them. Forgive them. This is so antithetical to what we think being human is all about. Right, we think this is like a uniquely American thing. This is like a uniquely human thing. Like if Darwin was right, we just want to eat one another and procreate and just climb that chain until we're the biggest and the baddest or dead. So contrary to what that reptilian brain inside of us thinks, there is something outside of our need for survival that is important to what it means to be human and to flourish. And Jesus says, forgive them. These are the words of God's will. You are forgiven. This is what God has in store for you. You are forgiven. This is your wholeness and your humanity. You are forgiven, because in this is reconciliation. In this, you are being brought home. You're being brought home to God. You're being brought home to your neighbor. You're being brought home to the earth on which you stand, and you are being brought home to yourself. In this grace-filled divine moment of love towards the world, as Jesus stretches out his arms and dies with the words of forgiveness on his lips, he is stretching out towards you, and in one stroke, you are made whole, humanized, brought back to life, recreated. And so the first thing that Jesus shows us is that to be fully human is to fully entrust ourselves to this. And that will be really hard, and we will so often get it wrong. And yet the God we are entrusting ourselves to loves us enough to forgive us, to pick us back up, to dust us off, and to help us move on. But the second thing that Jesus shows us is that even in the worst moments, that God is with us in the hour of darkness. God is not a distant, all-powerful God who is uninterested in our suffering. Right? We like to talk about God's omnipotence. If I say we, y'all are probably like, no, we don't, actually. I can't tell you the last time I've ever said that word. Sorry, I projected a little bit there. Some of us like to talk about God's omnipotence, right? God is all-powerful. He can do all things, right? And this is great. But this doesn't really say much about the God that's revealed in Jesus Christ, because the thing that God reveals most about God's self in the person of Jesus Christ is God's willingness to set aside that all-powerfulness, to diminish it, to step into weakness and even death itself. That God actually really loves us by laying aside his power so that God might be with us, even in our darkest moments, maybe especially in our darkest moments. In those moments where you feel like God is nowhere to be seen, maybe it's then that God is actually closest to you. I get it. We want a God who gives us certainty. We want a God who takes away our pain. We want a God who brings us some sort of comfortable life. I understand that. That would be nice. The priest and author Barbara Brown Taylor says it this way: us church folk often mistakenly think that what Jesus' cross means is that because he died that way, I won't have to. That Jesus died so that we do not suffer frightening things like that. Or to quote Hauerwas from last week, that Jesus died so that we might have a moderately comfortable life. But Jesus shows us that part of what it means in this world to be a human being is to encounter suffering. That Jesus is entering into the fullness of the human experience, and he seems to be suggesting that a really central part of that is suffering and death. But Jesus shows us that God is not beyond our suffering, outside our suffering, that God has willingly, voluntarily, in love, entered into it with us in order to redeem and remake it. See, we want answers. Why did this happen? But God gives us presence. And in those moments where we turn to the heavens and we say, my hour of darkness has come, an answer, a philosophical argument offers you very little. If you can imagine, while a loved one is dying, some sort of voice from the heavens saying, well, you see, the reason this is happening is da-da-da-da-da-da-da, offers you very little comfort in that moment. We think we want answers, but what we really want is love. And if a loved one is dying, answers provide little solace, but in the midst of loss, in the midst of suffering, what can matter, and many of us have experienced this, is the feeling of yourself being loved. The feeling of someone coming alongside of you and weeping with you, hurting with you, voluntarily taking your grief upon themselves. And this is friendship. And this is what God does in Jesus Christ. And in Jesus Christ, in our suffering, we are loved and we are carried and we are held in the midst of our darkness, especially by one who has entered into death itself and has come back from it. And this is our story. This is our God. This is what this week is inviting us to imagine, that God is with us, and that we are with God, and that absolutely nothing can separate us from this God and this God's love. Because he's even gone to the depths of our own personal hells ahead of us in order to be with us and to bring us back out the other side. I told you all a while back, I encountered a a novelist named Francis Spurford who wrote an apologetic book, which is a little weird thing to do. It's brilliant. I love it. I find myself coming back to it, and there's spots where it makes me weep. But he says this in this work. He said, yes, it's true. It is not well with the world, but at least God is here in it with us. We don't have an argument that solves the problem of the cruel world, but we do have a story. And this is the story that tells us what we need to hear about God and what we need to hear about ourselves. This is the story we find is becoming our story, that we are invited into. And that is, in fact, the story that teaches us what it means to live full human lives. It's the story of Jesus. If this is the story that tells us how to live, it's a story that makes it clear that in our misery, in our chaos, even in our death, God is with us, God is for us, and God is worth trusting because God deeply loves us and will never, ever, ever let us go. And I know I can say that. It can sound so great on paper, but in those moments of pain and darkness, it can be so hard to wrap your heart around and hear this. You don't need to. Even in your heart's hardness, God is with you and God's got you. Even in your deafness and your blindness and your, I just feel like God is nowhere to be seen. Lord, I don't believe. Help me. God's still there, still doing what God always does. In all of our scurrying about, and all of our attempts to try and carve out a life for ourselves, trying to figure out what it means to be human, trying to figure out who the heck we are, what life is about, what we want life to be about, Christ stands at the center of all of it. Stands at the center even of our darkest hours, showing us that suffering is a part of the story, but that it's not the end of the story. So what I want to invite you to this week is what might it mean for you to actually pay attention to this story this week? To do the really simple and basic thing of just turning your gaze towards the Christ. Right? There's not a one-size-fits-all pattern here. Maybe for you, it's taking a few moments in the morning just to open yourself up in prayer to the God who you don't feel like is there, but Brandon said he was there, so maybe he is, and I don't know, I think you might be here, so here I am. Maybe for you, it's to come back to this story. I would encourage all of us, maybe it's been a while since you've heard the story of Jesus' passion, but reading Luke 22 and 23. Maybe you read it throughout the week. Maybe you read those 2 chapters every day. Maybe you come this evening, we're going to have a discussion on a book that we've all been invited to read, The Wood Between the Worlds, and we'll sit around and we'll kick around how these different ideas and ways of thinking about Jesus' death have encouraged us, impacted us, challenged us. Maybe it's watching a film that I believe embodies so much of what we've talked about here today, the film Silence. And you come join us on Wednesday night and we'll have some drinks and some laughs and talk about what in the world was that. Maybe it's you joining us on Good Friday at 7:00. We'll come in here and we'll just listen to the story together. It's the one service a year where we're like, look, this is all about spectation. Just sit back and just look upon the glory of God. Right, those are some suggestions. None of those things are going to get you closer to God. None of those things are going to make God happier with you. Going out and playing golf instead is not going to make God more angry with you. This is simply about your attention. What is it that you could do to pay attention to the Christ this week that would help grip your heart this week, that would help just jumble up your imagination in a good way this week? To get your mind off the stocks and off the news and off the scroll and off all the things that our hearts long to pay attention to. None of this is about getting to God. It's not about making God love us. It's not about getting God to do something for us. Rather, it's about our stopping and gazing gazing on the God who loves the world, being with the God who loves you. Sister Hoder wrote in her piece on Bruegel's painting, it's the task of the Christian to decide what place their Savior will take in the messy and overpopulated landscape of their interior life. And so what will it look like this week for you to decide what place Jesus will take in the messy and overpopulated landscape of your interior life? I want to end today by reading what I find to be a compelling picture of the story that we're being caught up in. Whether we're paying attention to it or not, it comes from Spurford's book, Unapologetic. There's a whole chapter where he just writes as a novel the story of God's love for us. It's beautiful. I recommend it. But here's an excerpt from what he does before that chapter. He says, all is not well with the world, but at least God is here in it with us. We don't have an argument that solves the problem of the cruel world, but we have a story. When I pray, I'm not praying to a philosophically complicated absentee creator. When I manage to pay attention to the continual love song, I'm not trying to envisage the impossible to imagine dominion beyond the universe. I do not picture kings, thrones, crystal pavements, or any of the possible cosmological updatings of these things. Instead, I look across, not up. I look into the world, not out or away from the world. And when I pray, I see a face, a human face among other human faces. And it's a face in an angry crowd. A crowd engorged by the confidence that what it is doing is the right thing, that it is being virtuous. The man in the middle of the crowd does not look virtuous. He looks tired and frightened and battered by all the passions around him. But he is the crowd's focus and center. The center of everything, in fact. Because if you are a Christian, you do not believe that the characteristic action of the God of everything is to mold the course of the universe powerfully from some far-off distance. For a Christian, the most essential thing God does in time and all of human history is to be that man in the crowd, a man under arrest and on his way to our common catastrophe.
That concludes today's sermon. As always, if there's anything we can do to help serve you or help you connect with our church, we encourage you to say hey at redemptionhru.com/connect. We want to foster a community where everyone is seen, known, and loved. Now, as you go about your day, go in the love of the Father and by His Spirit, embody the hope of Jesus to the world around you.